Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS-Inform. I'm your host, Bill Potter. Joining us in the studio, as usual, on Fridays during the legislative process in the state of Indiana is State Senator Mark Messmer. Senator, welcome to the show.
Great to be here as always.
Well, we're at a crossover point, I think.
Yep.
Is
Monday
how you
and
describe
Tuesday
this?
were the end of the first half of session. We finished work on all the Senate bills. House finished work on all the House bills. Starting Monday, then the bills will switch chambers and we'll start working on the bills for the second half of session.
So for the most part, any new law that there might be looked at has pretty well been presented.
Yes.
But does it mean that you cannot present something else? If something
There would still be, like if I had a bill in one of my committees and I chose not to move that bill and a bill comes over from the House that has some similarities to it, you could still amend in language into a House bill or into a Senate bill during the second half of session. Then that's it's more than likely going to end up in conference committee if you do that, just to make sure the changes were that followed all the the House and Senate rules, but it does happen occasionally that another idea gets expanded or changed significantly during the second half of session.
Okay, so was this an exciting week, being the last week before you take your break?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And I think every bill that had any ounce of potential controversy to it, or things that were just changed and changed and changed, they all stack up on those last 2 days. So Monday was the last day we could amend bills, and then Tuesday was the last day we could pass bills. And I had said last week that there was about 50 bills left to process Monday and Tuesday, and so we ended up with 201 bills total, and some bills were up for final vote on Monday, which I had 2 of them up for final vote Monday that passed. The Senate Bill 128 on regional road funding, it passed 47-2, and then the bill that I had working with the Attorney General's office to clarify what a direct sales company is and a pyramid scheme is, that passed 49-0, both on Monday. But Tuesday was the day that all of the final votes on all the bills that were, some of them were very heated debates on the floor. So
well, let's talk about those.
So we'll cover the list of those.
All right.
And a couple of them weren't necessarily controversial. Some of them were just really good bills and took a while to hammer through. So one that passed was Senate Bill 213. It's going to allow what they call microcell technology, where they, instead of putting up big cell towers, the next wave of cellular technology is going to be boxes that mount on utility poles, light poles. A lot smaller, lot less coverage, but lets them get a lot higher density and primarily it'll start in the urban areas. Indianapolis is scheduled to be the first what they call 5G city in the country. But they kind of need this bill to get in place to, clarify, sometimes cities pass ordinances that say if you're going to put up anything like this, it has to be in something, in a piece of decorative artwork, basically. I mean, some just crazy restrictions, which, people want, and this 5G technology will run at the speed of fiber optics. But so it's a little different configuration than the current cell towers and cell signals, which are still pretty good. The LTE, path that we're on, I mean, that's still, very reasonably high speed, but the microcells will even be quicker. And then eventually, as they deploy out into rural America, this 5G technology will be how they expand, into some of the hilly, more poorly, served territories as well. Along with that, and maybe I'm going to jump ahead on a bill we talked about earlier,
okay.
The Senate Bill 478, which was allow rural electric cooperatives to run fiber optic cable on their poles, will really work hand in hand, because if you have the fiber network distributed, you have this 5G, microcell technology. Even those remote poles, in the REC territory could be the way they get that 5G technology with that fiber, on the existing rural electric overhead wires, to work hand in hand and really get into some unserved or poorly served remote areas very inexpensively. So
exciting technology coming,
yes.
but you got to have a law that
yeah,
matches
because
that.
current law said rural electric cooperatives, which the laws were written back in the 50s, could only run power through their cable. Well, in 1950, fiber optics wasn't even a thought. And a lot of rural electrics already have dedicated fiber that they've ran, or dual purpose wire that has power wire and fiber in the same bundle, already out into their territories. And they wouldn't necessarily be the broadband provider, but they'd partner with a group like Perry Spencer Communications. There's dozens of other small broadband providers across the state. They could have, RECs could have the wire pulled on their cable, on their lines, and then partner up with a group like Perry Spencer to then get that broadband deployed to the homes. So probably one of the most exciting potentials for getting that unserved customer service finally that we've seen in a long time. So
that'll be exciting.
Pretty neat. Those will work hand in hand. Another bill that got some attention was Senate Bill 309. It deals with, there was a lot of utility legislation in it, but also in that was the net metering law that we have for the first time really got a potential to get on the books. Currently, net metering programs, the IURC, which regulates the big publicly traded utilities and their utility rates, they've got a rule that allows for net metering to operate, where if you generate more than you consume with a solar system on your house, the publicly traded utilities buy your excess at retail rate, but they're limited to 1%. If a utility area, once they hit 1% of their customer base of their load, the program goes away. Now, we're not there yet. I think statewide the average is about 0.2% of the utility customers in places like Vectren, Duke, American Electric Power. I mean, places that are served by those companies there's only 866 customers statewide, which it's a small fraction now, but in the last year or two, that growth has started to increase exponentially. So they're going to get to that 1% pretty quick, probably in the next year or two that they'd hit that. Well, then the net metering program disappears. So you have folks who are wanting to promote solar. They say, well, don't pass any law. Well, if we don't pass any law, their rulemaking authority grants them the ability to have a policy or rule, not a law. I mean, to operate under that rule till the 1% cap is hit, and then it's done. So do you want to do nothing and let it go away, or do we want to set something up? So what we ended up with was any current solar customers have a 30-year grandfathering in of their current program. If they're in now, they're in for 30 years. Be it a school, be it a public library building, be it a residential customer. If they're in the program now, they're grandfathered for 30 more years. Up until from July 1st this year, for the next 5 years, those folks will get that same retail program for 15 years. And anybody after this next 5-year window, they'll basically, they could get it for up to 10 if they get in at the end. But after that point, then they're basically the repurchase. Right now we have it set at 25% above wholesale. That number could probably get adjusted over time and come up with maybe let the IURC calculate the rate, with individual utility companies. But the last thing you want to do is let it go untouched. States like Nevada and Arizona, who've done nothing, ended up with 10 to 15% of their generated load coming from residential solar customers getting a retail rate. And what that ends up doing is shifting the cost to the non-solar customer, and causing their rates to go up 15 to 20%. So if you don't do anything, it can get to be a point where the whole system just breaks down. So that bill passed it was a bipartisanly passed bill out of the Senate this week, off to the House, and we'll see if it gets some changing. Two bills that passed, I voted no on both of them, that made some, I call some very significant changes to food stamp eligibility. One, we currently have a prohibition on drug felons from getting food stamps, and one of the bills allowed drug felons to get food stamps, and another one took away most of the eligibility requirements for assets away. Just does an income measure only, but could potentially let somebody with a significant amount of assets, as far as homes and cars, qualify for food stamps just based on income only, not on asset determination. I thought that was a little unusual to have somebody could live in a mansion and fall under the right income guideline on actual and qualify for food stamps. Seemed a little odd. I voted no on those. They both passed 34-16.
Okay.
So the same 34 people and 16 people liked or didn't like both of those bills.
But it hasn't passed because it'll still go to the House.
It'll still go to the
Okay.
House. Yeah. So we'll see what happens on the House side. Senate Bill 198, a really nice update to the career and technical education program. Currently, the Department of Education administers with the career and tech education funding. It's approved in the budget. It goes to the Department of Education and gets distributed from them. The shift is going to be to take that career tech education money and let it be administered by Department of Workforce Development. Steve Braun took over that agency 2 years ago, a Jasper native, and doing a phenomenal job of putting into place what he passed a law 3 years ago when he was a House member that required Department of Workforce Development to come up with statistical measurements, job-based needs assessments across the state, by region, by employer. Where are the job openings? What are the pay rate of those jobs, and what are the skill sets required to fill those jobs? So he's got unbelievable data that he's generated over the last couple years. So now we're going to take that career tech education, high school, tech education funding, and we're going to prioritize in the next 5 years where are the jobs with the most demand and highest pay, and give schools that offer programs in those areas significantly more than CTE classes that maybe are low pay, low demand. Instead of giving everybody $400 per student per class in CTE funding, we're going to do more like $675 for the high skilled, high demand career tech programs, $400 for ones that would be classified as middle income, middle demand, and $200 per class for low demand, low pay. Rather than treating them all equally, let's incentivize. And then starting next year in 15 school corporations across the state, and they'll be broken up in small schools, middle-sized schools, and big school districts. The 8th grade classes in 15 of those schools, we're going to do a career development, like a career assessment test in the 8th grade level for those kids. And then present to them, if you have interest in a career tech education program, and here's the ones that are high pay, high demand, here's what you need to do to prepare yourself to get there. Where are your skills, where are your interests, and if 4-year degree college program is yours, then here's your path, and if a career tech education career is yours, here's your path. And then in 2018, we'll administer that test, to all 8th graders. We'll give 1 year to work out the bugs, try it on a few, see what needs to be adjusted. But all of those things really come from the work of Steve Braun in Department of Workforce Development, and exciting changes that are, I think, really going to help serve they predict in the next 10 years, we're going to need to have 1 million jobs filled between, just growth in the economy and people, 65 and up that are retiring. So we've got to start finding a way to fill those jobs, and we have the students and the ability. I mean, we have the people to do it. We just have to make sure they're being directed appropriately. So really neat change coming up in that. Oh, the pre-K expansion bill, we had a Senate bill, there was a House bill. The Senate bill was drastically reduced in scope compared to what the House bill was and what was in the governor's budget proposal. But I did vote no on expanding the pre-K program. Currently, we're in a five-year trial period of taking kids that came in 3 years ago into preschool, and then at the end of third grade, testing them to see if there was a significant, because the studies have shown by the third grade that preschool bump that they get, neutralizes out. Some studies have shown significant, advantage still at the third grade level. Some have shown it tends to neutralize by the time they get to third grade. We're in the third year of a 5-year pilot program. 73% of the people on my pre-session survey said, don't expand it until the 5-year study's done. And there was some merit to the changes that we did on the Senate bill. It was only a $3 million expansion to the current $12 million program. But we do live in a representative republic, of which my people that I represented, a 73 to 27% response said, don't expand it until we know if it's going to be worth the investment. But I did vote no on that. It did pass, I think 40 to 10, something in that range, but following my constituents' desires on that issue. Senate Bill 322 will require people that are arrested for a felony to have a DNA sample taken. The main emphasis for that, or push for that, is there's a lot of unsolved rape and murder cases across the state, across the country, and many times, if they would have taken DNA samples from people who committed murder or rape, and they would have ran, if they had the DNA sample from the unsolved case, and if they would have done that DNA sampling, there's many times and many examples of that came up in our testimony, and one in Indianapolis had that person had a DNA sample taken when they had a prior felony arrest. They'd have been apprehended before they committed another murder. So pretty significant crime investigatory tool. If you're arrested for a level 6 felony or higher, and the felony charges are dropped, the DNA sample, and data has to be destroyed. If there's nothing, if a year goes by and they don't ever file any charges, the DNA sample has to be destroyed. So there is some protections for individual identification protection. That issue has gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and from challenges in other states and been upheld. So it's not been deemed a privacy violation, and we've got some protections in it to help for that. Another bill that had some great deal of discussion was we currently have a requirement that any minor going in for an abortion has to have parental consent. There's a waiver process that either the minor or her doctor can file, to have a judge, waive that if the judge deems the person is mature enough to make that decision, even though they're 17 or younger, or it's in the best interest of the child. That's current law. But the updates to it are when a doctor or minor asks a judge for a waiver, the parents need to be notified that a waiver has been requested, and it gives the parents the opportunity to submit their testimony as to why they would not like their daughter to have an abortion. Allows the judge to weigh the minors, the doctors, and the parental evidence, all three, and then still comes down to the same thing: is it in the best interest of the child? The judge could still come up with the same ruling, but it requires some parental notification of that. And we'll try to wrap up on this bill because we're running long.
Sure, yeah, that's all right.
Some changes to that are some on the consent form. The minor and the parent, or the minor has to consent to it, and the parent has to consent to it if there is a parental consent. If someone who is not the parent or guardian tries to falsely claim they are the parent, it's a level 6 felony. If a doctor or the healthcare provider does not notify Department of Child Services or law enforcement, if there's been someone 15 and under, come in for abortion, they're required to notify Department of Child Services to do an investigation as to why this happened. If there's suspected child trafficking and law enforcement. So there's enforcement penalties for that. If they don't notify DCS, if they don't notify law enforcement, a doctor can lose their license, or a healthcare provider can have sanctions on their license, and level 6 felony for faking being the adult or guardian. And if you assist someone in getting an abortion illegally, you can be subject to being sued by the parents. So most of it's just putting teeth into the law, but the crux of the basic law stays the same. A waiver can still be granted by a judge, but it requires the parents to be involved in the process.
Well, there has been a lot
Okay.
to cover. We'll have you again next week. We'll talk about how things are starting for the second session. Thank you
Great.
very much for coming.
You're
in.
welcome. My
All right.
pleasure.
Thank you. And it does go to show that return that survey. It makes a difference with the senator because he pays attention to what you feel. Thank you very much, Senator, for coming in. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. We're local people watching local people.